In middle school, I had this bully, Kevin, and he was a dick. He came up with this horrible nickname for me in 7th grade. My name's Lydia, and Kevin would call me Lydia Chlamydia. In 7th grade, I didn't even know what chlamydia was, but I knew it wasn't good. And not only did Kevin call me that, but he got other kids to start calling me Lydia Chlamydia too. But luckily, the nickname only lasted a year. By 8th grade, everyone had forgotten about it. Except for me. I never forgot. And all through high school, I was paranoid that someone would remember the nickname and start calling me Lydia Chlamydia again. So fast forward like 13 years. It's Friday night, and I'm out at a bar in LA. I'm ordering a tequila soda, extra lime, and I feel someone tap me on the shoulder. And I turn around, and lo and behold, it's Kevin. He's like, "Hey, Lydia, do you remember me? We used to go to middle school together. I called you Lydia Chlamydia." I was like, "Yes, I do, Kevin." He's like, I'm really sorry about that, and I'm a little tipsy right now, and I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but my senior year of college, I ended up actually getting chlamydia, and it's crazy because I thought of you. Anyway, long story short, I ended up taking Kevin home with me because there is nothing that turns me on more than hearing about a bully get his ass handed to him by karma.
This is why you never go to the well on your own. In 1983, a young boy was camping with his family on Roan Mountain in North Carolina when his mom asked him to head on down the path and get some water from the well. When the boy didn't return, his mom went to check on him and he was gone. A massive search party was launched to find him, but with temperatures rapidly dropping and finding no trace of him, the family braced for the worst. Then, miraculously, on the 7th day of the search, the boy shows up on the mountaintop in an area they had already searched, healthy and clean. When they asked the boy, "Where have you been?" he said he had been at the well when a tall, faceless man showed up behind him, scooped him up, and brought him to the top of the mountain where he kept him in his cabin all week. After the boy gave a very detailed description of exactly where this cabin was on the mountain, the police were eager to go find it and confront this guy. But the park superintendent just raised his hand and said, "Guys, it's pointless. I've worked here 40 years. There are no cabins on Roan Mountain."
Crazy ass story time about how I almost got away with sneaking out. A little background information. It was the summer of my sophomore year in high school, and my parents are super strict. Like, they had a tracker on my phone, they had a tracker in my car, they have cameras all over my house, and my curfew was 7:30 even on weekends. Well, this boy that I really liked was throwing this party, and I begged my parents to go, and of course they said no. So my friends and I came up with this elaborate plan on how I was going to sneak out of my house and go to this party. Well, one of my friend's brothers had his license. So at 11 o'clock, after everybody fell asleep, they parked in my neighbor's driveway. Before everybody fell asleep, I made sure to put my ladder up to my window from my bathroom. And because it was in the back of the house, there were really no cameras around there. Well, skip ahead, I couldn't get down the ladder. So my friend's brother had to come around and try to move the ladder. But I was still too scared to go down the ladder by myself. So her brother crawled up the ladder. And once he was on the roof, he tried to help me get down. Well, then he fell like for part 2. Part 2 about how I almost got away with sneaking out. So like I said, he fell off the roof. Let me elaborate on that. So while I was going down the ladder, my foot slipped. So he grabbed a hold of my hand and I started falling along with the ladder. So then he grabbed a hold of the ladder, tried to pull it back, but when he did that, he flipped over the ladder. Well, he fell through this glass table that was on the deck that was around my pool, and everybody in my house woke up. My dad came running outside. Oh, and her brother wasn't moving after that. So my dad called an ambulance, and my friend who was with her brother had to call her parents. And pretty much after that, I got grounded for a full year. I didn't have a phone or anything. They took my car away. They also drilled my windows shut. My friend didn't get grounded because her parents knew that she was going to this party. Oh, and her brother was in a coma for 3 months.
This is why you should never watch my videos before going to bed. In 1986, a young girl opens her closet to find a man wearing a dress and holding an axe. He grabs her and ties her up, and then walks around the house and does the same thing to the rest of her family. While the guy is ransacking their house, one of the kids breaks free, runs next door, and tells his neighbor. The neighbor calls the cops show up, the family's saved, but the guy is nowhere to be found. The family leaves the house and stays with relatives in hopes that they'll catch this guy before they have to go back. But after a few weeks, they haven't caught him, there aren't any leads, and they say, "You know what, we'll go back to our house anyways." As the family's pulling back into their driveway, the father looks up at one of the windows and sees, for a split second, the head of the man with the dress in their bedroom. They call the police, who go in and find pennies glued to the ceiling and weird writing all over the house, but they can't find this crazy guy. Until one of the officers found a secret crawl space in the basement, where psychotic killer Danny LaPlante had been living for 2 months. Yes, this really did happen. In 2015, a man woke up to a strange post-it note sitting on his desk. On it was a to-do list that he didn't recognize in handwriting that didn't look like his. Since he was up late the night before doing some work, he assumed he must have written out the list when he was half asleep and kind of forgot about it, so he just crumples it up and throws it away. 2 weeks later, he wakes up to dozens of these post-it notes all over his wall, and they're all blank except for one that, in the same weird handwriting, says, "Our landlord isn't letting me talk to you." Now feeling totally freaked out that some crazy person is crawling around his apartment at night, he starts looking for signs of a break-in, but there aren't any. Instead of calling the police, he shares his experience on Reddit asking for help, and one user's comment literally saves his life. Turns out the man was writing the notes to himself and then forgetting, because his brain was slowly dying due to a carbon monoxide leak that was only discovered because a user suggested he install a detector. This is why you should be very careful who you talk to online. A 16-year-old girl was home with her mom when she got a disturbing text message from a boy she had recently met on Snapchat. He told her he was right outside of her house, but when she went to look, no one was there. Frightened, she decides to sleep in her mom's room that night, and right before she goes to bed, she gets another text from the boy that just says, "I'm in your house." She shows her mom, who immediately searches the whole house, checks every door, turns on every light. There's no one there. So even though they're creeped out, they go back to bed. The next morning, she gets up and she goes back to her bedroom and immediately feels like she's being watched. She checks in her closet, looks behind her door, there's no one there. Then she noticed that the shoe boxes she normally kept perfectly arranged next to her bed had been moved. So she crouches down to put them back in order, and then out of the corner of her eyes, she notices something. The boy who was texting her was under her bed. This is why you should always watch videos to the end. In 2003, a woman came home to her apartment to see that her door was unlocked. She went inside, nothing was missing, so she assumed she must have left it open. When it happened a few more times, but still nothing was missing in her apartment, she went out and got a camera, set it up in her apartment aimed at the front door. The next day, her door was unlocked, so she reviewed the footage. She watches in horror as late in the night, her front door opens and in walks this tall, creepy man who looks around and then walks towards her bedroom off camera. She immediately sprints out of her apartment and calls the police, who show up and tell her to go back in her apartment and just try to stay calm, and that they would put an officer right outside her door so she's safe. As she's sitting on the bed, totally traumatized, she realizes something. She only saw him enter her apartment on that video. She doesn't know if he actually left. As she's sitting there, she feels breathing on her ankles. She runs out, the cop comes in, and he finds the tall, creepy man under the bed holding a knife and a camera. This sounds totally made up until you listen to the police report. In the early 90s, a teenage girl started to see these shadowy figures that would come into her room at night and crawl all around her room and even grab at her legs. At the same time, her health began to rapidly deteriorate, which ultimately led to her death, which doctors never understood. A few days after her death, her sister woke up to a whistling sound and saw a creature crawling around her room with no face. The same night, her mom was ripped out of bed by someone. The father calls the police, who come over, they search the house, they don't find anything, it's all quiet. As they're about to leave, they hear something. Horrifying screams coming out of the bedroom. They run inside, no one's in there, but there are these huge gashes on the wall that were not there before. The police get out of there. In the police report that was filed immediately after this house call, the chief inspector and the 3 officers that were there that night swear they saw and heard the same things as the family, which means the police officially believed that the house.
Storytime, my boyfriend caught me cheating on him with his older brother. A little background information. I was a sophomore in high school, and him and I had been dating for about 3 months. And every day after school, I would go over to his house. Sometimes he would be late coming home, though, because he would have soccer practice. But I would go to his house anyways because I was friends with his sister, who was also in the same grade as me. Well, his older brother was a senior in high school. Well, the one day I went over his house, and his sister wasn't home. She was tutoring at school or something. And neither were his parents. So I texted my boyfriend saying that I was just gonna go home, and he said, "No, stay, I'll be there in like 30 minutes. While I was sitting on the couch, his brother comes downstairs. So he comes and sits on the couch next to me and puts on a movie. And he could have sat anywhere because they had a big ass couch, but he sat right next to me. So we start talking, and a little bit into the movie, he gets closer to me. And one thing led to another, and then we were in his room. And literally 2 minutes later, we heard the front door open. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how my boyfriend caught me cheating on him with his older brother. So we heard the door open downstairs, and at this point we were both naked. So I ran to my boyfriend's room as fast as I could, and as soon as he came upstairs, he saw me without any clothes on. So then I had to play it off like I was ready to do the nasty with him. So for the next 2 weeks straight, I was going to my boyfriend's house and doing the nasty with his brother while he was at soccer practice. Well, the one day after his brother and I did the nasty, I fell asleep in his brother's bed. So my boyfriend came upstairs and he didn't see me anywhere, so he was knocking on his brother's door. And we didn't hear anything because we were sleeping, so he just opened the door. And I woke up and he was screaming at both of us. So him and his brother got into a fight, like literally fist fighting. I was trying to break it up, but then I was also trying to put clothes on. And when my boyfriend saw me trying to get dressed, he took my clothes and told me to get out. And when I wouldn't get out because I didn't have clothes, so he literally grabbed me and threw me outside. And then he came back and threw a towel at me, so I had to walk home with only a towel on.
This is why you should always lock your doors. A class was playing a game of Kahoot when they heard a voice on the intercom say, "This is not a drill, go into lockdown." The students huddled in the back of the classroom and then the power went off. Minutes later, the students heard the sound of a man screaming at the top of his lungs, running down the hallway. The lunatic man started banging on the lockers and his screams gradually got louder. He then started banging on the classroom window, yelling, "Open up." He eventually left, and 10 minutes later, a voice on the intercom said, a mentally ill person had entered the school and attacked the lady at the front desk. The staff did a sweep of the school and still couldn't find him, so they locked the doors and resumed class. Later that night, one of the janitors went into the utility closet when this happened.